Hello, I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin. I'm a lifelong journalist. I've produced stories for ABC News, CBS News, and CNN. I love meeting fascinating people and having thought-provoking conversations. And that's exactly what we do here. And that is thanks to my co-host, author David Parker. David is the author of two great books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. And by the time you're listening or watching this, you may have access to his newest book, Rome 476. And welcome, David. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, we couldn't do it, and we wouldn't do it without you. Yeah. Tell it before we dig into the topic, and I have a good one for us today. I always try to have a good one, but tell us a little bit about your new book.
Well, the new book, the title is in the book. And when I say it, people go, what is that all about? What does Rome 476 mean? It means the collapse of Western civilization. The notion of civil rights, human rights, gone. And it took 1,000 years, and even science and technology, gone for 1,000 years. Renaissance means rebirth. It came back. And why did the Rome, and I'm saying, why did Rome fall? Or I'm asking, why did it fall? Because all tax revenue, and they had a lot of tax revenue, went to pay interest on the debt. And I'm asking Americans if that sounds familiar. We have a budget deficit of 30 or 31 trillion. Interest rates rise like they are right now. Interest on the debt is higher. So at 8% of 30 trillion, that's 2.4 trillion. Well, that's what our tax revenue is. It's between 3 and 4 trillion. So most of it is going to pay interest. There's nothing left for Social Security or Medicare or the military. And in fact, those enterprises are paid for by borrowing right now. And so when the Huns came in 476, they didn't come in with swords, they came in with sledgehammers. And they sledgehammered Rome to smithereens. Everybody knows those pictures of the Colosseum, the one wall that didn't fall down. Their Supreme Court, the Forum, their Congress, their White House, everything's dust. The soldiers didn't lift a finger. They hadn't been paid. They hadn't been paid. There was no money for anything. That won't happen here, but we're close to it. And that's what I'm saying, that we're spending money, and either we raise taxes on the middle class to 50 to 70% to pay for it, or we start cut spending. Reduce the size of government, what the founding fathers said we should do.
Yeah. No, it's definitely important topic. And
that's my book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I've read many of the essays collected in that book, and I highly recommend it, of course. I was speaking, to continue on this tangent a little bit before we get to the topic of the day. I was speaking with our friend Tripp the other day about education, and I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about sort of the consequences of that collapse of one of the greatest civilizations of our time. I know you've told us about the library in Alexandria and the wisdom that was literally lost because that society, that civilization collapsed. And that's the consequences that we're talking about, right?
At the library, which collapsed coincidentally, not because, but coincidentally about the same time, around 400 AD, it burnt. And there's all kinds of reasons for it, and there's all kinds of speculation for it. But at that time, they were studying atoms, and they were studying space flight, aeronautics.
It's amazing.
It took 1,000 years to get back. They were talking about molecules. The Greek 5th century Athens was, I think, the highest moment in humanity. Everything around you, every building, every sculpture, every architecture, every thought in mathematics and science and biology and theater and politics, literature, poetry, it's all Greek. They almost invented it all like in 1 year. God pointed to You're going to do it for humanity, like Jesus Christ said, I'm not coming back. Humanity, you better live with that. I'm giving it to you. We don't realize the level of conversation among citizens was 2 or 3 or 4 times higher than today. We think we're smart. Compared to them, we're really dumb.
Wow, it's amazing. Well, I tell you what, let's act like that, that movie from the 80s, Back to the Future, get into our DeLorean and fast forward 1 or 2,000 years, and what's going on in our world today. I mean, not to peg our episode to literally this week, but something quite historic happened this week. It's the first time we've seen a president or a former president arrested, indicted and arrested. And we will see how that all unfolds over the months to come. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, you've studied our founding fathers, democracy, power. What are your thoughts at a time like this?
Yeah, I have crystal clear thoughts on that. It's very possible that Donald Trump will be, convicted, but will run for president and win. And he might be excused if while he's president. He may have to go to prison after that term. I don't know how that works, but he may win because the nation is so mad that we have progressed from our founding fathers, which are very close to 5th century Athens and 1st century Rome. They took the best of those 2 high periods, both of which are higher than today by far, and created a 1-page little document, the Constitution. And people said in 1933, or Franklin Roosevelt said in 1933, and he was elected on his campaign in 32, I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to flip the coin. We're not going to have freedom from government. We're going to have freedom with government. And the Supreme Court vetoed every piece of legislation until he finally scared them into place. Literally scared them into accepting Social Security, accepting everything. And we can't reverse it. And the nation is so mad, some of it unconscious, that's why Trump might win. People are still mad at what Franklin Roosevelt did. They can't articulate it. That some of the people who are supporting him, you wonder who these people really are. They look like they're crazies, but that's a tip of an iceberg. Yeah. Half the nation knows that progressivism is 100% wrong.
Yeah. Well,
so he's going to be busted by that's how it's busted, by somebody like Donald Trump, some monster. A monster's got it busted.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's interesting. I had a friend of mine who passed away a couple of years ago. He was a futurist, kind of like Alvin Toffler and John Nesbitt and authors like that, who talk about trends and they advise companies. And he was saying, I remember, I think I was asking him, do you think Donald Trump could really be elected? I should have asked you, and you said immediately you knew he would be elected 6 years ago. But my friend said that when does change happen? Historic change happens is that moment of breakdown. It's, things reach a certain point where they must change. Do you see it that way also?
Yeah, Trump will be elected precisely because he's convicted, precisely because he's a monster, precisely because he's a mental case. That's why he'll be elected.
Yeah, amazing.
The Republican Party tried, and I'm not even Republican, I'm a San Francisco conservative. It's not possible. The George W. Bush, they had a slogan called "Starve the Beast." Every time the Democrats recommended a new program, George Bush says, I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to double the funds that you're asking for. I'm going to outspend you like crazy. And because this way will bust the country and it'll bring it to a head. Donald Trump himself, he doesn't know that he's the head. He's the person who's going to make the change, or he may know, but not very. He couldn't even articulate that. He's just so crazy that it's how it will be. We don't know.
I think he needs to read. I think he needs to read your books. I don't know if he's a student of history, actually.
I think, and plus, he's not as dumb as he appears sometimes. He talks on television because he has an audience in mind. He's saying what he thinks they want to hear because he's running for office. Once he's in office, he doesn't have to, especially the second time, he can't run again. He doesn't have to talk that way anymore. Once he's in office.
Now you're scaring me. Yeah.
And he may actually do that. He says, okay, I would look forward to his first State of the Union address. He might speak like a completely different person. And people have said that many times. He negotiated a big deal with Indonesia at one time. Maybe he was putting up hotels or some big deal. And the prime minister was in his office. He says Trump's office in his tower in New York is a very modest, small little office. It's not an ostentatious thing at all. A desk in a little room. And he spoke so politely and so humanely. And then when he left, Trump says, now you're going to be speaking to my lawyers afterward. That's another program. They're going to tear you up. But between you and I, we're buddies, you know.
Amazing.
So that's a whole other side to Trump that he never reveals, and that may come out. That would be amazing.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure I want to see this, but we'll see.
No, I don't want to see it, and I'm not going to vote for the guy, but that's I'm expressing what I think is out there.
Yeah, interesting.
Some truth to what I'm saying, I think.
Yeah, no, I believe it. So we're at about the midpoint of our conversation today. And so I just want to remind our viewers and listeners, if you're joining us midstream here, this is a San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring the wisdom of my colleague, David Parker, who's author of 3 great books now, Income and Wealth, a San Francisco Conservative, and Rome 476, which we were just discussing. So rewind your audio there or video to hear more about that. But it is interesting. Again, we're talking about just that unimaginable concept of a president or former president being indicted and arrested and tried for certain, allegations. It really seems to speak to the number one, the delicacy or the fragility of democracy, but also a lot of people said it demonstrates that our democratic systems, the 3 houses of government, the 3 branches of government really does work. What are your thoughts about all of that?
Yeah, my first thought is that's true. Is that if we're fighting each other and screaming and talking, that's a lot healthier than when Hitler and Mussolini rose to power and nobody said a word. That's the opposite. They're very orderly people. Oh, yes, we're going to bring change. So it's fine. We think that the notion of 3 branches of government comes from a fellow named Montesquieu in France in the 18th century. And our founding fathers, they took that thought. But that really comes from Cicero, 1st century Rome. That was one of those great periods in humanity. He says there has to be 3 branches of government. And they're completely different. A Senate is a small group of people that represents the wealthy, represents the landowners, represents the great industrialists of the nation, the people who are actually employing almost everybody, and the whole economy is dependent on. They need a voice for themselves. 100 senators, that's all. And the House of Representatives, that's the people. That's 435 representatives, and based on population. And they're young people with less experience, and they may not have much money themselves personally. That's a very good distinction. And it's a bicameral legislature. And then we have a third party. We have the presidency. He's administrator, and he has some discretion because the Congress supposed to make law, but they can't act in an emergency. They can't make a law. So if a nation's attacking us, the president can say, we're going to defend, I'm sending the military right now. Or a natural catastrophe, anything. The president has some discretion until Congress catches up and says, wait a second now, let's make this a law. And then the Congress just can't go past anything. It has to be constitutional. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional democracy. You just can't vote 90-10 to do something if it's against the law. There's law. The Constitution is a law. I like to say it's a 1-page document. And they took the best of thought from Greece, from Rome, in the 18th century Age of Enlightenment, Britain, Scotland, France, and America. The very best thought. all those great Voltaire, Adam Smith, Hume, John Locke, and they put together a great document. And we have progressed from that, and a lot of people are mad. God gave us the greatest thing in the world, and we're throwing it away. We're better. We're moving on.
And I mean, I know the answer to this question, but I take it you think we need to return to the kind of the sacredness of that one-page document, not the progressive, revamping it every couple of years, right?
So our Constitution was written in 1787, I think, the convention. And a few years later, a fellow named Alexis de Tocqueville came here, and it's considered one of the greatest documents in political science or sociology. He says, here's what the United States is. It's going to be the greatest country in the world. He says at the beginning, idiots, get rid of the slavery. What is wrong with you? But beyond that, he says, everyone in this country is so responsible. It doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. The peasantry or even the citizens of Europe, they're not reading the newspaper. People living in a log cabin where Abraham Lincoln grew up in Kentucky are discussing international affairs. They're reading the paper. They're talking to each other. That doesn't exist anywhere. So we created a country that individuals were responsible for themselves, and that worked. And all of a sudden, because we had a depression, which was 1929 to 1932, 4 real awful, tough years. And in 1933, it was over. President Roosevelt campaigned in 1932. Here's what I'm going to do if you elect me. And he forgot to look that the economy had recovered. And he put all those things, all those programs into place against the Supreme Court, finally acquiesced, and just turned that depression, the recovery around, and it lasted another 8 more years to 1941, World War I, II.
The recession.
No, there was depression. It got worse. We had 15% unemployment. When Roosevelt came into office, all those programs, unemployment jumped to 25%. And then it finally came down, and people were saying, oh, thank you, President Roosevelt, for getting us out of the depression, instead of, as all economists today say, including Paul Krugman, he put us, all the programs were wrong. The government created that depression. All economists agree on that. They don't agree on too much.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me when I think of, an individual who ascends to the presidency with a desire to seize even more power for himself or herself. And I think of, Trump ordering the Defense Department to fire tear gas on protesters, or, activating the military, during the takeover of the Capitol and so on. But I guess I don't naturally think about what FDR did. I think, I've heard many people over the years praise FDR, thank goodness for the WPA or, what have you. But in both cases, Trump and FDR, it was that seizing, or that desire to seize more power like a king, right?
FDR was maybe the greatest dictator this nation has ever had. Benjamin Cardoso was the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He said that Roosevelt literally, he might have been handicapped, literally frightened the Supreme Court. He said, I'm going to put 6 more justices on here, and they're going to vote for everything I say. That's the end of checks and balances. This depression is too important. If we have to junk democracy, we're going to junk democracy and end this depression. We're going to put the Works Progress Administration, and we're going to have employment increase from 15 to 25. Only Roosevelt thought it would go from 15 to 5. They didn't, because government can't solve people's personal problems or the problems within the economy. That's not something government does. And we reversed everything this nation was founded on. And some people, and many people today are mad.
Yeah. Well, that's an important insight to end our conversation on today. We can certainly continue. I'm sure that, again, this balance power. I'm sorry.
No, we could really continue. I'm saying I
know. Okay, great. But I think this conversation is a very good example of one of the qualities that I love about your books and about your writing. It's providing that historical context. As I often say, as a journalist, I'd cover the White House or interview senators or what have you, but I'm always thinking about today's headlines, and that historical context was really missing. And I think that people can really become enlightened by reading your writing. Is there anything more you'd like to say about your books before we close?
I would like to think the attraction to my books is what you just said, as I give historical context to all the issues of the day. But I'm a person who's also in business, whose thumb is on the pulse of the economy. I'm an entrepreneur, very successful. So my examples are from business, something people find interesting and can relate to. They're not examples from academia. Even if the writing is scholarly, I'm writing for the lay person at the same time, and I give examples from business as well as historical. So my books are interesting. They're thought-provoking.
Absolutely, absolutely. Income and Wealth, a San Francisco conservative, and now Rome 476. You can find, you can order all three of them through David's website. That's davidparkeressays.com, or through Amazon. And if you're watching this episode on our YouTube channel, make sure you click the subscribe button so that you don't miss any future episodes of our podcast. And we'd love to hear your comments. So please let us know. And thank you, David. And I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you, Tom. I'll be there.
Okay. Thank you.